grateful for your presence and the opportunity once again on this side of eternity to share with you the Word of God. As we get into this lesson, I want to share with you some thoughts along the lines of our continued series. We took a break from it last week for unusual circumstances, the week before for a gospel meeting, and we're back to it now. I believe there's only going to be one more lesson because this will stretch it out to 7 lessons and covering about 10 weeks. So it's getting a little long in the tooth, but the next lesson, Lord willing, is going to be, what do we know about aliens? So that was kind of the reason why I even started this series, and I save it to the end, but we'll talk about that. And but let's get into this evening. Why did God make mosquitoes is the essence of the lessons, but it's not all there is to it, but I want you to consider these things with me. You know, there's no doubt that there are some incredibly awesome things that we have to look at, to behold, to enjoy in the nature around us. Beautiful parts of this mortal creation. If you are kind of a person that actually leaves your home at any given time, maybe you've walked through the grass barefoot. I know I just shuddered some people on that. But you know, if you like to get out in the woods, or you like to get out on a lake, or like to go look at things, I'm one of those kind of people. I like to get out there. The only thing is I don't like snakes or ticks. I can't stand spiders. But I do like to be outside. I mean, you know, other than that. But there's some incredible things to look at. The beauty of both plants and animals and landscapes can be such a draw for others that, you know, they want to just go and experience those things. They will go and travel just to go see something that's just there in the dirt where that place is. I mean, that's just one of those things that we see, but causes people to travel the world over. You know, the handiwork of our Creator is what we need to be keeping in mind. Every time we think about some beautiful place, it's because God created it for us. God has allowed for that situation to be there, and He is the one provided for it. Of course, Psalm 19, as we use it quite often, especially in this series, it talks about the handiwork of God is clearly seen in the firmament. And so here we are dwelling under the firmament and certainly participating in this creation. But there's an undeniable amount of evidence that we see in the things that we are looking around, the artistry and the design. And of course, we understand that if there's a design, there has to be a designer. That's one of the arguments for the existence of God. But all these things surround us all of the time. And so we come around to this, though, but we also have the mosquito. Did you know that some people use the mosquito to argue against God? That they actually say, because the mosquito exists and it's so annoying to human beings, it's actually proof that there can't be a loving God because he would eliminate mosquitoes for us. I thought, that is so selfish. That is like the heights of selfishness. But anyway, so perhaps we need a little better way of looking at that. Maybe we need to consider it from a little different light and try to find some beauty in that situation. In life, they say that there's someone for everyone. Maybe there's somebody that really likes mosquitoes, but I haven't really met them yet. But nonetheless, let's consider these things together. You know, there's a local company. I'm not going to name it. I think I could if I was pressured into it. But there's a local company that comes and fogs your yard. And, of course, that wouldn't work where a lot of us live in the country. But if you live in town and you want to fog your yard to get rid of mosquitoes for an event or something like that that you might be hosting, there's this company that will come and they'll fog your bushes and your plants and all the backyard and the front yard or whatever it might be. But what's interesting to me is in their advertisements, they say these words: mosquitoes do not benefit humans in any way. Well, that's kind of an interesting take on being annoyed by mosquitoes. But then they go further and they say they need to be entirely eradicated. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, that was a real leap from I don't like those things to they need to be annihilated. They need to be gone entirely from the planet. Like we have to look up and it's going to have to be on like a file somewhere online and a historic reference to what's a mosquito, Dad? You know, no, I don't think we're looking at it right that way. So my problem with that approach is that all of God's creation has a purpose. All of God's creation has a place. So I can't come along and say, I know better than God, and I wouldn't have created mosquitoes in the first place if I was God. See, that's what people say by saying they need to be eradicated entirely. So there must be something good about even the mosquito. Let's try to figure it out if we can. Let's look into the subject with open Bibles. Great and small, God made them all. I think that's not my line, but I think it's been used, and that's one of those things, and if it sticks, that's all good. But Psalm 19, verses 1 through 6 declare the fact that the psalmist embraced God's creation. And not only embraced God's creation, but also his participation in God's creation. That all that surrounds us is the beauty of this natural world and the things that are involved in this natural world. And he proclaims in his statement, although inspired, he says that it's God's greatness that is shown, God's power that is shown. And one of the things that we've talked about in time past is how powerful God is. He, as the ultimate beginning cause of all things, has to be more powerful than anything that he did cause to happen. And so God is more powerful than tidal waves. God is more powerful than tornadoes. God is more powerful than lightning. All of those things come from him and his natural cause. And so therefore, we know that God's greatness is shown in his creation. We are told to look for his signature, to look for it. His signature is there, but you have to look for it there in the firmament because it shows his handiwork. It shows his handiwork. You know, there are great and beautiful things in this world, even here in our small corner of the earth, and I want you to not take that for granted. Now, most of my life I spent within half an hour of Niagara Falls. Niagara Falls has an annual draw of 15 million people from all over the world. They flock there. That may be way underneath the number. But there's people that will travel all the way from Japan to see Niagara Falls and take a picture. And it's the most photographed, one of the most photographed places on earth. Well, I grew up half an hour from there, but I still liked it. I thought it was interesting. I would go down there and just drive by it every once in a while. Not during tourist season, but every once in a while I'd drive by it because I didn't want to take it for granted. And I want you to understand that even here we have an incredible amount of God's signature where we live in the northeast corner of Arkansas. We've got things to look at and beauty to behold. I know that you've taken note that here where we are, that we border one of the great rivers of the world. One of the great rivers of the world. Not just because we like it, but it is one of the great rivers of the world. And in fact, if we could just convince the Missouri River to flow, not into the Mississippi River, but, with it, then it'd be the longest river in the world. We put those two together, or really close. But here's the thing. The Mississippi River is the second longest in North America, next to the Missouri, and it's part of the fourth largest river system in all of the world. And it's right there. I mean, it's right there. It doesn't take long to get there. You could be there in like 45 minutes. But I want you to think about this. The Crothersville Bridge is just a touch under a mile and a half long from the time that it starts to the time that it begins. That's not the entire time you're over the water, but the bridge is a mile and a half long. At 70 miles an hour, it takes 1 minute and 17 seconds to cross that bridge. So if you're doing the speed limit, it takes 1 minute and 17 seconds to cross that bridge. So here's the thing. How much water goes underneath that bridge while you're on that bridge? Do you know that? Do you know the answer to that question? Of course, it's up there. But the reality is 285 million gallons of water go underneath your car while you're on that bridge. 285 million gallons. Over 250 million gallons of water pass underneath you in that 1 minute and 17 seconds. That's a pretty amazing river. Not to mention that I understand that when they built that bridge that there was catfish down there as big as Volkswagens. And the only reason I know that is because everywhere they've ever built a bridge and they put down footers under the water, there was catfish bigger than Volkswagens. I don't know if it's the scuba masks doing that or what, or just fear, but nonetheless. So some incredible things that we have. I want us to understand, we're not void of God's signature near us. We got some neat things going on. We also have the Ozark Mountains to our west. We live on Crowley's Ridge. I mean, we live at the beginning, the foothills of all of that. I mean, that's kind of neat. The Smoky Mountains to the east. There's all sorts of beautiful things within a day's drive of where we are. We're surrounded by some of the beautiful landscapes that God has put in order. Nobody came along and said, you know what would really help Sevierville, Tennessee, if we just built some mountains. Nobody did that. God did that. We get to see it. We get to enjoy it. And if you go a little bit west to the Ozark Mountains, you get to see some beautiful things there too. And so when we know that God's evidence is everywhere, and that we don't understand how he made the mountains, but he did, then we're on to something. Every creature is from the hand of God. Now, we could look at Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 through 31. I want to take some time over in the book of Job. That's why I'm kind of going over these points and trying to get to that particular area of the lesson. But Genesis chapter 1, verse number 1 to 31, we talk about God made all of the different creatures of the world. And you know, some people refuse to believe in God. They don't believe in God, and they make foolish assertions about certain species needing to be eliminated or eradicated because they evolved improperly. You see, that's what people are going to say. Mosquitoes evolved improperly. One of the things that I can't believe I'm ready to admit this, but I've spent like 22 hours, I kind of sort of estimating 22 hours, 25 hours reading on mosquitoes to make sure that I wasn't just up here preaching some falsehood about the tiny little pest that it is. But nonetheless, I was reading about mosquitoes, and just about every single article that I read about mosquitoes said mosquitoes have been on Earth for 100 million years. That's interesting, considering the fact that they overshot creation by like 990 million. And I can't do the change. I can't do the math right now. But, you know, here's the thing. We need to understand that that's ridiculous. They're trying to tell us that they just evolved and that they accidentally evolved and they're not really particularly important. Well, I think mosquitoes are just as important as the mountains. That's kind of why we talked about it. You know, I would strongly encourage that those who have this particular mindset take some time to read the book of Job. I encourage you to read the book of Job. I don't know when the last time it is that you did that, but it's 40 chapters, the book of Job. I want you to go through and read those chapters, or 42. But Job is an interesting character, because Job was able to, more than perhaps anyone else, have an audience with God where God said, go ahead, ask me whatever you want. And Job was wise enough to ask some questions. But Job was also wise enough to stop and listen when God replied. We're going to take some time to look at some of those things as we get into this particular section of our study together this evening. I want you to look in Job chapter 38 with me, if you would. Look at Job chapter 38, turning back to the Old Testament, of course, before the book of Psalms, way back. But we find this in verse number 3 down to verse number 7. I want you to consider this with me, if you would. This is God responding to Job when Job's made certain statements. He was kind of questioning why God was doing what he was doing, or why God allowed things to happen, or whatever it might be in natural world that Job didn't particularly like. But look what it says here. It says in verse number 3, now prepare yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. That's interesting. I don't know how many of us would be prepared for that. That's kind of an overwhelming situation. But look what happens here. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? How many people come along and say, well, I just wish that old river wasn't there. If that old river wasn't there, I could get to this place or that place so quickly. You know, if that old lake wasn't there, I could get to this place or that place so quickly. Where were you when God laid these things out? I don't think you were around then. It says, tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched out the line upon it? To what were its foundations fastened? Or who laid its cornerstones? When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy? Who did all of that? Was it man? Was it you, Job? Or was it me, God? You see, that's when we have this idea that we look at the earth around us and say, well, I would do this, or I would do that, or I wish that wasn't there, or I wish this bug wasn't here. We need to be careful, because everything has its purpose, and God knows better than we do. Look a little bit further there at verse number 12 down to verse number 15. We're going to look at a few different readings. I encourage you to read both chapters, all of them. But in our lesson, we don't have time. But look at verse number 12. Have you commanded the morning since your days begun, and caused the dawn to know its place, that it might take hold of the ends of the earth, and that the wicked be shaken out of it. It takes the form like clay under a seal and stands out like a garment. From the wicked, their light is withheld, and an upraised arm is broken. See, again, we have a situation where there's people who are arguing against God, and God's saying, who are you? Who are you to tell me I'm wrong? I am the one that did all of this. I am the one that knows. I am the one that commanded the morning. Interesting. Job chapter 38, verses 34 to 38. Take a look at that section with me if you would. It says in verse number 34, can you lift up your voice to the clouds, that an abundance of water may cover you? You imagine what it would be like if farmers didn't have to put those big pivots out in the field? They could just walk out in the field and go, all right, cloud, bring some rain, and the rain would fall. You know, God could do that. Remember we talked about this morning, Jesus calmed the storm? Do you think he could have brought one just as quickly? Imagine he could. It says, can you send out lightning that they may go and say to you, here we are? Can you imagine? The lightning says, okay, Lord, tell me where to strike. You know? Interesting. Who has put wisdom in the mind? Or who has given understanding to the heart? Who can number the clouds by wisdom? Or who can pour out the bottles of heaven when the dust hardens in clumps and the clods cling together? See, man is so little compared to God. And God gave us this beautiful, incredible mind, this ability to reason and think and be logical and all of those things. But then we always do what my dad always told me I did when I was a kid. He gave us an inch and we tried to take a mile. That's what we do with God. God gave us an inch and we try to take a mile. Well, I know better than God, and this part of God's creation needs to be eliminated. God's reminding us through the record of Job that we don't know more than God. One more section in the next chapter. Look at chapter number 39 with me, and just verse number 26 and 27. Over there in that place it says these words, does the hawk fly by your wisdom and spread its wings toward the south? You ever look at anything that we say flies? Does it look like bird wings to you? No, it's our rendition of what it might be, but we haven't figured out how to make bird wings. It's not how this works. God figured that out way before us. Does the eagle mount up at your command and make a nest on high? See, all of these things, when we look to nature and we see these lessons, and we have no control over that. We didn't do that. God did that. God is incredible, and God knows better than we do. If a creature is present in creation, it has a purpose. Even if you and I don't understand what that purpose is, it has a purpose. Well, let's talk about the fact that it's part of a functional design in our second point. We're told that on the fifth day in creation, that God made everything, every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, and all things created were seen as good by God. All things were good. Everything on the fifth day was good. And he used the word creep twice. Now, the way we use the word creep anymore today is kind of like creepy. But nonetheless, everything that creeps on the earth, all those bugs. I got to tell you something. I almost was able to use Jen as my opening example instead of that exterminating company. Because if she walks out to the kitchen and there's an ant in her kitchen, she's looking for the flamethrower in the garage. You know, it's time for it to go. Not quite, but nonetheless, pretty close. She can't stand ants. She wants them eliminated from the face of the earth. But here's the thing. God made them. And even if you don't understand why he did, we must believe that there must be good purpose for every insect too. Even the biting ones and stinging ones, there's got to be a reason for them being. And of course, one might argue that stinging and biting insects maybe underwent some changes when mankind fell to sin. There was a difference. You think about that for a second. When they left the garden and they had to go out and till the soil, and by the sweat of their brow they would eat bread. And it said that thorns and thistles would grow up in the dirt. Well, that was different than the garden. But it's one of those situations where I don't know if if bees would sting them in the garden. I don't know if that was the case or not, but I know it's a reality for us. And it's not at my hand or your hand, but it's at God's hand that such was possible and that such happened. From bacteria to behemoth, the full spectrum of God's creatures in the creation, they all serve a great purpose. I didn't want to get into all of the finite details, all the minutiae of what makes a human body function. But here's the thing. You wouldn't be alive if it weren't not for trillions and trillions of bacteria living in you and on you. Right? But they got to be there or you wouldn't survive. And so this is part of it. God made those things happen. They didn't just happen upon us. They were things that God had in His design. Without, getting into the exact purpose of every single creature in the world, we need to know that this world is sustained by God. Now, I don't believe for a second that God just reached down and set us to spinning and walked away. I don't think that's how this works. I think God has an awareness of it, a keen awareness of us constantly. I think God looks out for us. I think God provides for us. I think all those things are absolutely true. But the reality is, we need to understand that every creature God uses to sustain life on planet Earth. Some creatures process our byproducts. Think about the things that would be piling up to our eyebrows if we didn't have the critters to take care of them. Our byproducts would be in the way, for sure. Also, various creatures provide food for others up the food chain. We've got insects that are eaten by birds, and birds are eaten by snakes, and snakes are eaten by rodents, and rodents are, I don't know, you just start to work your way up. But who's at the top of the food chain? We are, always. I don't care what the nature programs say. The nature programs say, now that Roger has wandered into polar bear country, he's no longer top of the food chain. Yes, he is. We are always the top of the food chain. I don't care where you're at. That's how God intended it. Now, if you're silly enough to wander into polar bear country and all you have to defend yourself is a toothpick, the polar bear may be using it. But you're still the top of the food chain, or should be. We need to understand that. We are here with that determined purpose that we are supposed to be the top. We are supposed to be, everything around us is for us. And we need to understand that. Genesis chapter number 9. I want you to take a look over there with us. We're done our readings over in the book of Job. Again, I encourage you to read the book of Job at your leisure. And so I want you to look over here, if you would, Genesis chapter number 9. And I want you to see that there was a little bit of a change after the flood. But nonetheless, we're going to see this situation where we are supposed to be dominant over animals, and we're supposed to be the ones that are the top of the food chain. It says, so God blessed Noah, chapter 9, verse number 1. God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, of every bird of the air, and of all that move on the earth, and all the fish of the sea. They are given into your hand. They're for you. And so he says, every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. Some of us really challenge that when somebody sets out a plate of snails or something like that. I had a dear friend that went to a place and he wasn't sure exactly what he was eating, but it was the best thing he ever ate in his life until somebody told him it was rattlesnake. And then he changed his mind entirely after he enjoyed it thoroughly. You know what I've said about that? 1 Timothy chapter 4 tells you as long as you pray for it before you eat it, it's food. But this is what God says way back in the book of Genesis as well. It says, every moving thing that lives shall be food for you, and I have given you all things, even as the green herbs, but you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is its blood. And then he goes on in his discussion, in his dialogue with Noah. But, we have a situation here where that's how the world functions. We've got to have little creatures for the bigger creatures to feed on. That's how it works. And we're at the top. God's complete knowledge of His creation really draws a lesson for our lives. God understands entirely. He didn't just randomly say, let there be creatures. He designed each and every one. He knows about them, and He teaches us from them, and we're supposed to learn from them. I hope that we do. Proverbs chapter 6, verses 6, 7, and 8 tells us, go to the ant, you sluggard, If you're feeling lazy, look at an ant. I was talking to Mike about this last night. We had a conversation real quick about ants because I don't know how it started. Anyway, but did you know that if you took every human being on planet Earth and put them on this side of the balance scale, and you took every ant on planet Earth, you put them on this side of the balance scale, they're about equal. There's that many ants. But the ants do outnumber us 2 million to 1. So if they ever get a strange idea, look out, But here's the thing. There's a lot of ants. And what would we do without them? But go to the ant, you sluggard. They're industrious creatures. Of course, Proverbs chapter 30, verse number 24 to 28. There are 4 things which are little on the earth, but they are exceedingly wise. The ants are a people not strong, yet they prepare their food in summer. The rock badgers are feeble folk, yet they make their homes in the crags. And the locusts have no king, yet they advance in ranks. The spider skillfully grasps with its hands, and it is in kings' palaces. Learn from nature. That's why God put it here a lot of the time. And so we need to learn from them and see the wisdom that they teach us. Now, thinking about that, I think we've gained a lot of knowledge. I think over the years we've gained an incredible amount of knowledge about various creatures. We've gained a knowledge by observation, by looking at them, to seeing what they do. But for us to come along as a participant in creation and say that another part of creation is unnecessary, it demonstrates how little we actually know, because that's certainly an absurd idea. So why mosquitoes? Let's get to the last point. There are literally trillions of mosquitoes in this world. There's over 3,500 named species. Did you know that barely 200 of them ever bite human beings? Out of the 3,500 species of mosquitoes, only about 200 ever bite human beings. And so when we think about that, a very small percentage actually bite humans or have potential disease with them when they carry it. It's a little more rare in the United States of America, in North America. This is the Western Hemisphere. Well, I shouldn't say that. Really, North America is probably the limit of it. But mosquitoes carrying diseases really are more of other areas of the world, more than here. But we know that that is a potential problem, but we have a very small number. So if we eliminate all of the mosquitoes, but only 200 species of mosquitoes ever are a problem for us, haven't we got rid of a whole big population for no reason at all? But that, again, lends itself to we don't understand everything God has done. The place with the largest population of mosquitoes is the Arctic. The Arctic, way, way up north. When you think about that for a second, did you read up there on the overhead? I just wonder if you did or not. The place with the most population of mosquitoes is not Tuckerman, Arkansas. Although at certain times of the year when the rice fields are full, you would think it is, because it's just, oh man, alive. You can't even breathe without pulling one of those things in. But the Arctic region of Alaska, Canada, and Russia, mosquitoes are there at a level of clouds. I mean, there's clouds of mosquitoes. And so with that, those clouds of mosquitoes, they feed migrant birds. They even the larva stages in the moisture in the ground is eaten by different creatures. They're really food for a whole lot of different creatures in the natural cycle of things that God put in order. So they're a necessary part of the food chain. And again, this is one of those things where these evolutionists or atheistic scientists, if there's such a combination that possible as that, but they come along and say, well, if mosquitoes were eliminated, another creature would just take its place really easily. No, that's not what we learn in God's scheme of things. There are some good things that come from mosquitoes. We've kind of been hacking on them a little bit, and we kind of wonder, and we have to just tell ourselves we just don't know why. And I suppose that's kind of it. But there's something good that comes from mosquitoes. At every stage in their life, they are food for something else. They're not really eating you when they get you. All they're trying to do, oh, by the way, and this is not a sexist comment at all, but only female mosquitoes bite people. I was waiting for a hymn book to zip past my head right there, but nonetheless, only female mosquitoes bite people because they have to have the protein from our blood or any host blood to make eggs, to have young. That's all they're trying to do, just trying to continue the population. But every stage in their life, they're food for other creatures. They actually pollinate. Well, I thought the bees did that. Yes, bees do that. Lots of different creatures pollinate. They go from flower to flower to flower. So if female mosquitoes feed on blood, what do male mosquitoes feed on? Nectar from plants. Nectar. That's what they feed on. That's where they get their energy from. And so they're going from plant to plant to plant, and they're carrying the pollen from plant to plant to plant, and they are pollinating and causing the growth of fruit and different things like that. So you say to yourself, well, where does that happen, and how is that important to my life? Well, I kind of said that myself. Where does that happen, and how is that important to my life? There's a certain type of mosquito that is believed to be the main pollinators for a subtropical plant called cacao. Did I get your attention with that? Because you eliminate mosquitoes and you eliminate chocolate from the entire world. Let's not do that. Okay? I like it too much. That's one of those things. I mean, you come along and say, oh, I hate mosquitoes. I wish we got rid of all of them. Okay, a world without mosquitoes is a world without chocolate. I didn't want to put this in the lesson. I didn't type it into the lesson, but I learned this as well. There's a certain type of mosquito called a midge mosquito, and it actually pollinates coffee beans. Think about what that eliminates if you get rid of all mosquitoes. Interesting. Also, the little mosquito is proof of God's creative work. Remember where we started this lesson? Talking about God's handiwork and his signature is vastly known. I want you, the next time you're sitting there in your lawn chair outside around the campfire, or you're laying in bed and that one mosquito that came in the house following you is right there by your ear going, I want you to think about that sound, because that sound is an important sound. The wings are little more than clear membrane. We've all seen mosquitoes. Yet, quite impossibly, they flap those wings 800 to 1,000 times a second. A second. Not a minute, a second. That's supersonic fast. There was a scientist trying to replicate that in a laboratory. We can't even construct a membrane that will be capable of that, but yet God does this with trillions of mosquitoes all the time. 800 to 1,000 times a second. I want you to have a little perspective on that number, because we all like hummingbirds, and we've got a lot of hummingbirds in this area. How fast do hummingbird wings move? Well, they only move 50 to 60 times a second. That's 20 times slower than mosquitoes. Mosquitoes are 20 times faster than hummingbirds in their wing movement. That's impossible. You can't take just a skin and move it like supersonically fast, but God can. There's proof in that sound that we get from those mosquitoes. We cannot begin to replicate that. It's impossible except for God. God said, were you there? Or excuse me, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? I think that's the resolve of this. When Job was confronted with that, where was I when God created this? Who am I to ask God to get rid of something? Or who am I to assume that I know that something should be gone? We don't know everything about the natural world. We probably never will. From the time that we are frustrated by some little creature, from some moment where we're stung or we're bitten into or something happens along that line, I really think that we need to remember that there's a reason for all of that, even if we don't understand it. In Deuteronomy chapter 29 and verse number 29, it says, "The secret things belong to the Lord our God, but those things which are revealed belong to us and our children forever, that we might do all the words of this law." There are many things that we don't know, and there's many things that we cannot know. but God's will for our lives is freely revealed. We can know what God wants. Don't think for a second that it's like some sort of annoying bug that bit you and you don't understand why. When it comes to the will of God, we can understand what God wants. There is a reason for all of God's creatures, and there's a reason for you. Jordan read for us from Acts chapter 17, verse number 24, beginning. It talks about that God made you. Verse number 27 gives you the purpose of why, that you may seek the Lord and hope that you might grope for him or find him, and find him, though he's not far from each one of us. God is waiting for you, and he's blessed you with an opportunity to embrace his revealed truth, to embrace the information that he's given to us freely, so that we might have it for ourselves and for all the generations to come after us. The beauty of this natural realm proves there is a God. This book tells us who he is and what he wants, and that's why we need to embrace it. There is a place prepared for you and I that is far beyond this natural world. It is not mortal in any element. It is a wonderful, spiritual, eternal place, and that's a place that we long to be one day. We need to be prepared for it. God is waiting for you to fulfill your purpose in creation, so why not give him your faith and active obedience right now? Jesus Christ, the Son of God, gave his life for you so that you, even this evening, after listening to a lesson about God's creation, can say, hey, I need to do something about my relationship with God. I need to make sure that my relationship with God is right. And so Jesus Christ gave his life for you to have that moment of clarity in your mind, for you to embrace faith and confess him as the Son of God, to realize that sin is wrong and to reject sin completely by repenting of it, to have your sins washed away in the water of baptism, so you might rise and walk in the newness of life and strive to join us and work our way toward heaven. What a wonderful thing it will be to break free from this beautiful natural world to find somewhere that just eclipses all of it. Just amazing how that place is going to be. If you are a Christian not living the way you should, fix it. Don't miss out on God's greatest creation, the one he's taken time to prepare for us, as Jesus said in John chapter 14. Don't let sin stop your progress toward heaven. If you have sin in your life as a child of God, you need to repent of it. You need to pray to God for forgiveness. Get yourself back where you belong. If we can help you this evening, come to the Lord or back to the Lord. Let us help you as we stand and sing.